The early October wind scattered fallen leaves across the cemetery as people dressed in black gathered around the fresh grave of Robert Winters. His widow Emily stood beside the polished mahogany casket, her face a mask of proper grief. Her black designer dress and hat with a thin veil gave her the perfect image of a grieving wife, though anyone who truly knew the Winters' marriage might have questioned the authenticity of her sorrow. Emily nodded mechanically as mourners approached to offer condolences. He was a great man, they would say. Such a terrible loss. And she would respond with practiced phrases, "Thank you for coming," and Robert would have appreciated your support. But the truth was more complicated. Their 15-year marriage had started with passion, but cooled to a business arrangement within a few years. Robert, a wealthy real estate developer, provided Emily with the lifestyle she craved, and she gave him the socially appropriate wife his image required. They hadn't shared a bedroom in over 5 years. "The flowers are lovely," whispered Diane, Emily's closest friend, squeezing her arm. "You've arranged everything perfectly." Emily nodded, surveying the gathering of business associates and social connections. Everyone who mattered in their circle was present, exactly as Robert would have wanted it. His sudden heart attack 3 days ago had been unexpected, but Emily prided herself on pulling together a funeral, befitting a man of his standing. As the minister finished his remarks and invited mourners to pay their final respects, Emily noticed a commotion near the back of the crowd. People were turning and whispering, a ripple of curiosity spreading through the gathered mourners. A young woman was making her way toward the front, guided by an elderly man with a kind face. What caught everyone's attention was the white cane the young woman used to navigate, and her dark complexion, a stark contrast to the predominantly white gathering of Robert's social and business circles. The young woman, who appeared to be in her early 20s, moved with careful steps. Her face was wet with tears, though she carried herself with dignity. Her simple black dress was appropriate but not expensive, nothing like the designer outfits worn by the women of Emily's social set. "Who is that?" Emily hissed to Diane. "I have no idea," Diane whispered back. "Never seen her before." The murmuring grew as the young woman and her elderly companion reached the front row. Emily watched, increasingly irritated, as the elderly man helped guide the young woman right up to the casket. The young woman reached out, her hand finding the polished wood, and let out a soft sob that somehow seemed more genuine than anything Emily had heard all day. "Goodbye, Dad," the young woman whispered, barely audible but clear enough that Emily and those nearest could hear. A jolt of shock ran through Emily. "Dad?" Robert had no children, at least none that he had ever mentioned to her. And this young woman was clearly nothing like them. Not just because of her blindness or her race, but because of the raw emotion she displayed. Emily felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment. How dare this person show up and cause a scene? How dare she claim a connection to Robert that Emily knew nothing about? And worse, people were watching, whispering. With quick steps, Emily moved to the young woman's side, her voice low but sharp. "Excuse me, who are you and why are you disturbing my husband's funeral?" The elderly man began to speak. "Mrs. Winters, this is Zara. I don't care who she is," Emily cut him off. "This is a private service for family and invited guests." Zara turned toward Emily's voice, her unfocused eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry if I'm intruding. I just wanted to say goodbye to my father." The word father hitting the air again caused more whispers among the mourners. Emily felt the stares, heard the hushed conversations starting. "My husband didn't have any children," Emily said firmly, loud enough for nearby mourners to hear. "I don't know what you're trying to pull here, but I must ask you to leave if you can't compose yourself properly." The elderly man's face hardened. "Mrs. Winters, perhaps we could discuss this privately after the service. There are things about Robert that—" "There's nothing to discuss," Emily said coldly. "Robert and I shared everything. If you're suggesting otherwise, you're mistaken." She turned to signal the funeral director, who had been watching the interaction nervously. "Please escort these people away if they can't behave appropriately," Emily instructed. "They're upsetting the other guests." As the funeral director approached uncertainly, Zara straightened her shoulders. "I understand, I'll go. I didn't come to cause problems." Her voice broke slightly. "I just needed to say goodbye." The elderly man looked like he wanted to argue, but instead guided Zara away from the casket. As they walked back through the parting crowd, Emily heard someone say, "Poor girl. Doesn't she look a bit like Robert around the eyes?" Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Looking more closely at the retreating young woman, she noticed something she had missed in her anger: the shape of Zara's chin, the way she held her head. There was indeed something familiar there, but it couldn't be true. Robert would have told her if he had a child. Wouldn't he? The rest of the service passed in a blur. Emily found herself wondering about the young woman, about what she knew. What else might Robert have kept from her? As they moved to the Winters mansion for the reception, Emily overheard snippets of conversation that made her blood boil. "Did you see that blind girl? They say she's Robert's daughter. From before his marriage, apparently." Emily had no idea. "Can you imagine?" Emily accepted condolences mechanically, her mind racing. Who was this Zara? And if Robert had kept such a massive secret from her, what else had her husband hidden during their 15 years together? She would find out. Emily Winters always got to the bottom of things that threatened her position. And if this young woman thought she could show up and claim a piece of Robert's legacy and Emily's future, she was sorely mistaken. Little did Emily know that the confrontation at the cemetery was just the beginning, and that by the end of the day her world would be turned completely upside down. The Winters mansion buzzed with quiet conversation as guests gathered for the reception following Robert's funeral. Crystal glasses clinked, servers circulated with trays of canapes, and the soft strains of classical music, Robert's favorite, filled the air. Everything was exactly as Emily had planned, a perfect display of wealth and taste that reflected the image she and Robert had crafted over their 15 years together. Emily stood near the grand fireplace, accepting condolences with a glass of wine in hand. She was already on her third glass, trying to steady her nerves after the cemetery incident. Several guests had asked about the young blind woman, their questions thinly veiled beneath expressions of sympathy. "Such a lovely service," said Patricia, wife of one of Robert's business partners. "Though I couldn't help noticing that young woman at the cemetery. I didn't realize Robert had a daughter." Emily's smile tightened. "He doesn't. I have no idea who that person was. Some kind of imposter, I suppose. There are always people trying to attach themselves to successful men like Robert. Especially now." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, I just assumed. She seemed so genuine." "Well, you know how convincing some people can be," Emily replied, taking another sip of wine, "especially when there's money involved." Before Patricia could respond, Emily's attention was drawn to a commotion at the entrance of the room. The elderly man from the cemetery had returned, but this time he wasn't alone with the young blind woman. A third person accompanied them, a tall man carrying a leather briefcase dressed in an expensive suit that marked him as a professional of some kind. Emily felt her chest tighten. A lawyer, it had to be. She excused herself from Patricia and made her way across the room, intercepting the trio before they could get too far into the reception. "I thought I made it clear at the cemetery that you weren't welcome," Emily said, her voice low but sharp. The wine had loosened her tongue, making her less careful about appearances than she might otherwise have been. The lawyer stepped forward. "Mrs. Winters, I'm Harold Thompson from Blackwell & Associates. I was your husband's personal attorney for the past 20 years. I believe we need to speak privately." Emily felt a flash of confusion. Robert's lawyer was Philip Weston from Crandall & Weston. She'd met him several times. "My husband's attorney is Philip Weston. I don't know who you are, but this is hardly the time or place for whatever you're trying to pull." Harold Thompson's expression remained professionally neutral. "Mrs. Winters, I understand this is difficult." But Robert maintained several attorneys for different aspects of his affairs. "I handled certain personal matters. Perhaps we could speak in Robert's study." "There's nothing you need to tell me that can't be said after this reception," Emily insisted, aware that nearby conversations had quieted as people strained to hear the exchange. The blind young woman, Zara, stood silently beside the elderly man, her face composed despite the tension in the air. The elderly man placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Winters," Thompson continued, "I'm afraid this can't wait. It concerns Mr. Winters' will and certain provisions that take effect immediately." A chill ran through Emily. The will? Robert had assured her everything was in order, that she would be well taken care of. What could possibly be so urgent? that this unknown lawyer would interrupt the funeral reception. Fine, she snapped, no longer caring about the watching guests. We'll use the small sitting room, not Robert's study. The study was her destination later. She needed to search it thoroughly, especially now. She led them to a room off the main hallway, closing the door firmly behind them. The lawyer set his briefcase on a small table and extracted several documents. Mrs. Winters, I'll be direct. This is Zara Johnson. She is Robert's biological daughter from a relationship he had before he met you. Robert has provided for her in his will, and there are certain matters that— This is absurd, Emily interrupted, her voice rising. Robert would have told me if he had a child. We had no secrets. Even as she said it, doubt crept in. The separate accounts she'd discovered, the unexplained absences, the calls he took in private. I'm afraid that's not true, Mrs. Winters, the elderly man said quietly. I'm George Brown. I was Robert's business partner when we started our first company 30 years ago. I've known Zara since she was born 23 years ago. Emily turned to Zara, who stood calmly despite the tension in the room. If you're really Robert's daughter, why hasn't anyone ever heard of you? Why would he hide you? The question came out harsher than she intended, laden with implications about Zara's blindness and her race. The silence that followed was heavy. Zara spoke for the first time, her voice soft but steady. He didn't hide me from everyone. Just from you. Emily felt as though she'd been slapped. What is that supposed to mean? Thompson cleared his throat. Mrs. Winters, Robert was clear about his reasons. In his personal letter to me, he expressed concern about your views on certain matters. He believed you wouldn't accept Zara, and he didn't want to force a relationship that might be painful for his daughter. The implications hung in the air. Emily remembered comments she'd made over the years, things she'd said about people different from those in their social circle. Things Robert had gently challenged but never confronted her about directly. This is ridiculous, Emily said, her voice shaking. You can't just show up with some story about a secret child and expect me to believe it. Where's your proof? Thompson handed her a document. These are the DNA test results confirming paternity, conducted when Zara was 5 years old. And this, he said, offering another document, is a copy of her birth certificate listing Robert as her father. Emily scanned the papers, her hands trembling slightly. The birth certificate showed Zara Marie Johnson, born to Michelle Johnson and Robert Winters. Michelle was the love of Robert's life before he met you, George said quietly. They were together for nearly 3 years. When she got pregnant, they were planning to marry, but there were complications. What complications? Emily demanded. George and Thompson exchanged glances. Zara was the one who answered. My mother was diagnosed with a heart condition during her pregnancy. She needed care that her insurance wouldn't cover. My father paid for everything, but she died when I was 7. I was born blind, and my father made sure I had the best doctors, the best schools. He was always there for me, even if the world didn't know about us. Emily sank into a chair, the reality crashing down on her. All those business trips. The weekends he said he was golfing. He was with me, Zara said simply. He came to my piano recitals. He was there when I graduated high school, when I got accepted to the conservatory. He described sunsets to me and read me books when I was little before I learned Braille. The door to the sitting room suddenly opened and Diane peered in. Emily, people are asking for you. The caterer needs to know when to— She stopped, taking in the scene before her. I'll be out shortly, Emily said tightly, but it was too late. Diane had seen the documents in Emily's hands, had heard enough of the conversation. News would spread through the reception within minutes. As Diane retreated, closing the door behind her, Thompson continued. Mrs. Winters, Robert's will leaves 40% of his estate to Zara, including the vacation home in Vermont and his mother's jewelry collection. The remaining 60% goes to you, along with this house and the primary business holdings. Emily felt rage building inside her. 40%? The Vermont house she'd redecorated herself, his mother's jewelry she'd been promised. She stood abruptly. I'll contest this. You can't possibly think I'll accept this. This fraud. Mrs. Winters, Thompson said firmly, contesting the will would be unwise. The DNA evidence is conclusive and Robert's wishes are clearly documented. A court battle would only drain the estate and create a public spectacle. Is that really what you want? What I want. Emily's voice rose. What I want is for these people to leave my house, What I want is to not have my husband's funeral turned into a circus by some stranger claiming to be his child." Zara flinched at the outburst and George stepped protectively closer to her. "Mrs. Winters," Thompson began, but Emily cut him off. "No, I don't care what these papers say. Robert was my husband. We had a life together. You can't just show up and take what's mine." The door opened again, but this time it wasn't Diane. Several guests stood in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Among them was Robert's sister, Catherine, who had flown in from Chicago for the funeral. "Emily?" Catherine said, her eyes moving from Emily's flushed face to Zara standing quietly beside George. "What's going on?" The room fell silent. Emily realized she had lost control of the situation, of her emotions, of the carefully constructed image she had maintained for 15 years. And worst of all, she had lost control in front of the very people whose opinion she valued most. Catherine stepped into the room, her gaze fixing on Zara. Something like recognition dawned in her eyes. "You're Michelle's daughter, aren't you?" she said softly. Zara nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "You must be Aunt Catherine. Dad talked about you a lot." Catherine moved forward and took Zara's hands in hers. "I haven't seen you since you were a little thing. You look so much like your mother." She turned to Emily, her expression hardening. "I told Robert years ago that he should have been honest with you, but he was afraid of exactly this reaction." Emily felt the room spinning around her. Robert's sister had known. Who else had been part of this deception? "You knew?" Emily whispered. "All this time you knew that he had Zara?" "Of course I knew," Catherine replied. "Michelle was wonderful, and Zara is my niece. Robert made me promise not to tell you. He said you wouldn't understand." The guests in the doorway were whispering now, the news spreading like wildfire throughout the reception. Emily could feel her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The widow's dignity she had worn so carefully all day was in tatters. In that moment, looking at Zara's composed face despite all the tension and conflict, Emily realized something that shook her to her core. This young woman had known a version of Robert she had never met. A loving father, a man who kept his promises, who showed up for recitals and graduations. While Emily had shared a house and a social calendar with Robert Winters, Zara had shared his heart. And now, as the whispers spread through her perfect funeral reception, Emily understood that she had done exactly what Robert had feared. She had proven him right about why he needed to keep Zara a secret. In her reaction, her rejection, her public insults to his daughter, she had confirmed every doubt Robert had ever had about her character. "This isn't over," Emily said, but the fight had gone out of her voice. She walked to the door, pushing past the onlookers heading for the bar. She needed another drink before facing what came next. Behind her, she heard Catherine say, "Zara, honey, tell me about your music studies. Your dad was so proud of you." And that perhaps hurt most of all. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its deep chimes echoing through the now empty mansion. The last guest had left 2 hours ago, leaving behind empty glasses, half-eaten plates of food, and the lingering scent of expensive perfume mixed with sympathy flowers. Emily sat alone in Robert's study, a glass of bourbon in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. After the confrontation with Zara and the lawyer, she had somehow managed to maintain a facade of dignity through the remainder of the reception. She'd smiled mechanically, accepted condolences, and pretended not to notice the whispers that followed her around the room. But now, in the quiet of night, with the house staff dismissed and no one to perform for, Emily finally allowed herself to fall apart. She took another swig of bourbon, welcoming the burn in her throat. The documents from Thompson were spread across Robert's desk. The will, the DNA test, birth certificate, and a sealed letter addressed to her in Robert's familiar handwriting. She hadn't opened it yet. She wasn't sure she wanted to read his explanation for 15 years of lies. Instead, she'd spent the last hour going through Robert's desk drawers, filing cabinets, and the hidden safe behind the landscape painting, the one he thought she didn't know about. What she found only confirmed what Thompson had told her. There were birthday cards signed "Love, Dad" in Robert's handwriting, school reports showing Zara's exceptional grades and musical talents, medical records from specialists Robert had consulted about Zara's blindness, photos, dozens of them, of Robert with Zara throughout her childhood and into her young adult years, Zara blowing out candles on a birthday cake, Robert and Zara on a boat, both wearing life vests. Zara in a graduation cap and own, her arm linked with Robert's, and there were photos of a beautiful black woman who must have been Michelle, Zara's mother. Robert and Michelle on a beach, Michelle pregnant, Robert's hand proudly resting on her belly. The three of them together in a hospital room, a tiny newborn Zara cradled in Michelle's arms while Robert beamed beside them. A family. They had been a family. Emily took another drink, then reached for the sealed letter. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the pages. My dear Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you've met our daughter Zara. Yes, I said our daughter because in marrying me, you became part of her life too, even if you didn't know it. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I've kept a huge part of my life hidden from you for our entire marriage. There's no excuse that will satisfy you, but I owe you an explanation. I met Michelle Johnson when we were both 25. She was the most vibrant, intelligent, compassionate woman I'd ever known. We fell deeply in love and planned to marry when she became pregnant with Zara. But during her pregnancy, Michelle was diagnosed with a heart condition. We were told she might not survive to see our daughter grow up. Zara was born blind. The doctors couldn't tell us why, but it didn't matter. She was perfect to us. Michelle and I had 3 beautiful years together as a family before her health began to deteriorate significantly. When I met you, Emily, Michelle had been gone for 2 years. I was a single father to a 5-year-old blind daughter, trying to build my business while providing Zara with everything she needed. You were sophisticated, beautiful, ambitious, everything I thought I needed in my professional life. I intended to tell you about Zara right away, but then you made that comment during our 3rd date, about your friend's adopted child, about how you could never raise someone else's mistake or a child who wasn't normal. You said it so casually, as if it were a simple preference like disliking olives. I should have walked away then, but I was weak. I enjoyed your company, the doors you opened for me socially, the way you helped polish my rough edges. I told myself I could keep my 2 lives separate, my business and social life with you, and my family life with Zara. George and his wife Lisa became Zara's guardians on paper, though I remained very much her father in practice. They gave her the stable home environment she needed while I traveled between 2 worlds. I kept waiting for the right time to tell you, but the longer I waited, the harder it became. I saw how you reacted to people who were different, your comments about our neighbor's son with Down syndrome, your discomfort around George's niece who uses a wheelchair, your remarks about the color of people's skin as if it determined their worth. Each time, my resolve to keep Zara safe from that judgment grew stronger. This arrangement was deeply unfair to you, and for that, I am truly sorry. You deserved a husband who was honest with you, but my daughter deserved a father who protected her from prejudice, even if that prejudice came from my own wife. I've provided for both of you in my will. The details may seem unfair to you now, but I've spent Zara's entire life providing for her in secret. This is simply making things official and public. I hope someday you can forgive me. More than that, I hope someday you can know Zara as I do. Brilliant, kind, determined, and more capable than most people with full vision. She plays piano like an angel, Emily. She's studying at Berklee College of Music. She has my mother's laugh and Michelle's incredible mind. If there's any part of you that loved me truly, please consider showing kindness to our daughter. She's lost both her parents now. She could use a friend. With regret and affection, Robert. Emily let the letter drop to the desk, her vision blurred with tears. She wasn't sure if she was crying for Robert, for herself, or for the lonely, guilt-ridden man who had lived a divided life all these years. She reached for a photo of Zara at what appeared to be a piano recital. The girl was perhaps 16, seated at a grand piano, her fingers poised above the keys, her face alight with joy. Robert stood nearby, his expression one of pure pride and love, an expression Emily had rarely seen directed at her. A wave of shame washed over her as she remembered her behavior at the funeral and reception. The things she'd said to and about Zara, loud enough for others to hear. Her knee-jerk rejection, her focus on what Zara might take from her rather than what the girl had lost. The bourbon glass in her hand suddenly felt repulsive. She set it down and pushed it away, remembering how her mother had turned to alcohol after her father left. How she'd promised herself she would never be that woman. Emily stood up on unsteady legs and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens Robert had so meticulously maintained. Another piece of his life she'd thought she understood, only to realize she'd never asked the right questions. Had he learned gardening for Michelle? Had he described the colors of flowers to Zara? Her phone buzzed on the desk. A text message from Diane, checking in. "You okay? Call me tomorrow. People are talking. We need a strategy." Of course they were talking. By tomorrow, everyone in their social circle would know that Robert Winters, pillar of the community, had a secret black daughter he'd kept hidden from his wife for their entire marriage. The gossip would be savage, the judgment swift. Emily had always cared deeply about what others thought. Her mother had taught her that reputation was everything, that appearances mattered above all else. But standing in Robert's study, surrounded by evidence of a life he'd loved enough to protect at all costs, those concerns suddenly seemed shallow. Another text message arrived. This one from Catherine. "Zara is staying with me tonight. She'd like to collect some of her father's personal items tomorrow. Is 2 p.m. acceptable?" Emily stared at the message. Her first instinct was to refuse, to lash out, to make Catherine and Zara fight for every piece of Robert they wanted to claim. But then her eyes fell on the letter again, on Robert's final request for kindness. With trembling fingers, she typed, 2 p.m. is fine. She set down the phone and picked up one of the photos, Robert and Zara at what appeared to be a lake house. The Vermont property, she realized. The one Robert visited at least one weekend a month, claiming he needed solitude to think. The home she'd redecorated but rarely visited because it was too rustic for her taste. In the photo, they sat on a dock, fishing poles in hand. Zara couldn't have been more than 12, her smile wide and carefree. Robert looked relaxed in a way Emily had rarely seen, in worn jeans and an old t-shirt, so different from the impeccably dressed businessman she knew. Had any of it been real? Their life together, the social events, the charity galas, the dinners with friends, had he ever truly loved her? Or had she simply been convenient? The right wife for the public face of Robert Winters, successful businessman? Emily moved back to the desk and picked up the will. 40% to Zara, the Vermont house, his mother's jewelry, a trust to cover her education and any medical needs, and a note specifying that certain personal items were to go to Zara immediately. His record collection, the vintage camera he'd used to document her childhood, his father's pocket watch. 60% to Emily, the main house. The business interest, more than enough to maintain her lifestyle, though perhaps not with quite the extravagance she was accustomed to. It was fair. More than fair, considering he had supported 2 households throughout their marriage without her knowledge. So why did she feel so empty? Emily sank back into Robert's chair, inhaling the lingering scent of his cologne in the leather. For 15 years, she'd believed she knew her husband. She'd believed they had an understanding, a partnership. Now she realized she'd been living with a stranger, a man who judged her and found her wanting in the most fundamental way. And the worst part was, he hadn't been wrong. Her behavior today had proven that. The clock struck 1. In less than 12 hours, she would face Zara again, not as an intruder at a funeral, but as Robert's daughter, coming to collect pieces of her father to help remember him by. Emily wasn't sure who she would be by then, the proud, defensive woman who had lashed out at the cemetery, or someone new, someone who could look at her husband's secret life and find a way forward that honored his final request. She gathered the photos and documents, placing them carefully in a box she found on the bookshelf. Then she picked up one more item from the desk, a small velvet pouch she'd discovered in the safe. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a piano. An inscription on the back read, "For Zara, music is how the heart sees. Love, Dad." Tomorrow she would give it to her. It would be a start. Emily turned off the study light and made her way upstairs to the bedroom she'd shared with Robert. As she changed for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror, still in her funeral clothes, makeup smeared from tears, hair falling from its perfect arrangement. "Who are you?" she whispered to her reflection. "Who are you going to be now?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Emily climbed into bed alone. surrounded by the echoes of a life she was only beginning to understand, had been built on half-truths and careful omissions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and perhaps a chance at redemption, if she was brave enough to take it. The week following Robert's funeral passed in a blur of uncomfortable silences, ignored phone calls, and sleepless nights for Emily. The story had spread through their social circle like wildfire. Robert Winters' secret daughter, the public confrontation, the hidden life revealed. Emily found herself simultaneously the object of pity, curiosity, and judgment. She hadn't left the house since the day after the funeral, when Zara and Catherine had come to collect some of Robert's personal belongings. That meeting had been stilted and formal, with Catherine doing most of the talking while Zara moved carefully through Robert's study, her fingers trailing over his books and records, occasionally pausing to touch an item as if communing with it. Emily had handed over the bracelet wordlessly, watching as Zara's fingers explored the delicate charm, her face softening when she felt the inscription. "He was going to give me this for my birthday next month," she'd said quietly. It was the only thing she'd said directly to Emily during the entire visit. Now, 7 days later, Emily sat at her kitchen island, a cup of cold coffee in front of her, scrolling through yet another missed call notification. This one was from Diane, who had left 3 messages already this week. Emily couldn't bring herself to listen to them. She didn't want to hear the false sympathy covering insatiable curiosity, the subtle probing for details that would be shared at the next lunch gathering. Her phone buzzed again with a text message from Thompson, Robert's secret lawyer, Mrs. Winters. "Please call me regarding the reading of the will scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Emily set down the phone without responding. She'd received the formal notification about the will reading days ago. She knew she had to attend. There were papers to sign, legalities to address, but the thought of facing people, of sitting in a room with Zara and others who had known about Robert's double life, made her stomach churn. The doorbell rang, startling her from her thoughts. Emily glanced at the security camera feed on her phone and was surprised to see George Brown, the elderly man who had accompanied Zara to the funeral, standing on her doorstep. Her first instinct was to ignore it, but something, curiosity perhaps, or the crushing loneliness of the past week, made her walk to the door and open it. "Mrs. Winters," George said, his voice gentle. "I hope I'm not intruding." Emily's hand tightened on the door. "What do you want?" "Just a few minutes of your time if you can spare it." Emily hesitated, then stepped back to let him in. She led him to the living room, gesturing vaguely toward the sofa while she took a seat in an armchair across from him. "I'll get right to the point," George said after an awkward silence. "I'm worried about tomorrow's will reading. It's going to be difficult for everyone, especially you and Zara." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" Emily asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. George shook his head. "No. Nothing about this situation is designed to make anyone feel better. Robert made a mess of things, trying to keep his 2 worlds separate. But I didn't come here to defend him." "Then why did you come?" "To tell you about Michelle, about how this all started." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You deserve to understand the full story before tomorrow." Emily wanted to say she didn't care, that nothing could justify 15 years of deception, but the truth was she did want to know. She needed to understand how the man she thought she knew could have lived such a profound lie. "Robert and Michelle met when they were both working at Harrington Development," George began. "This was before Robert started his own firm, when he was just another ambitious young architect with big dreams. Michelle was in marketing. Brilliant woman. Had this way of taking Robert's technical architectural concepts and translating them into language that made clients excited. Emily tried to picture Robert as a young man, before success had polished him into the sophisticated businessman she'd married. They fell hard for each other," George continued. "I've never seen 2 people more perfectly matched. When Michelle got pregnant, they were thrilled. They were planning the wedding when her heart condition was diagnosed." George paused, his eyes distant with memory. "The doctors advised terminating the pregnancy. Said it put too much strain on her heart. But Michelle refused. She wanted that baby more than anything. Zara was born premature with several complications, including her blindness. The birth was hard on Michelle's heart. The doctors said she might have 5 years, might have 20. There was no way to know for sure. They had 3 good years together as a family. Then Michelle's health began to decline rapidly. She needed specialized care, experimental treatments. Robert poured everything into trying to save her. His savings, his time, his energy. But it wasn't enough. Emily found herself engaged despite her resistance. When did she die? When Zara was 7. Robert was devastated. He'd built his life around Michelle and Zara, and suddenly he was a single father to a blind child, trying to run a growing business. George paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully.
He met you about 2 years later.
You were everything Michelle wasn't. From a well-connected family, socially polished, ambitious in a way Michelle never was. I think he saw in you a path to a different kind of life, a way to succeed in the business world in ways he and Michelle had only dreamed of. Emily felt a stab of pain at this assessment, so she had been a business asset to Robert, not a love match. Reading her expression, George quickly added, "That's not to say he didn't care for you, Emily. Robert wasn't the kind of man who could spend 15 years with someone he didn't genuinely respect and value. But he didn't love me the way he loved her," Emily said flatly. George didn't deny it. "They were young together." First loves are powerful, but what Robert felt for you was real too, just different. Different enough that he couldn't trust me with the truth about his daughter. George sighed heavily. That was Robert's greatest mistake. He convinced himself he was protecting both of you. He was afraid your lifestyle, your social circle, would never accept Zara. And he was afraid Zara would feel rejected by you, which would have broken his heart. So instead, he lied to us both for 15 years, Emily said bitterly. Yes, and there's no excusing that. George reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. But that's not why I came today. I came to give you this. Emily took the envelope cautiously. What is it? A letter Michelle wrote to Robert before she died. She made me promise to keep it safe and give it to him if he ever remarried. I gave it to him the week after your wedding. I don't know if he ever read it. I found it in his desk at our old office when I was cleaning out his things. Emily stared at the envelope, her name written on the front in unfamiliar handwriting. I should have given this to you years ago, George said quietly. Maybe things would have been different. But I promised Robert I wouldn't interfere in his marriage. Another mistake in a long line of them. He stood up slowly, his age showing in the stiffness of his movements. I'll see you tomorrow at the will reading. I hope this helps you understand a little better. Emily didn't move as he showed himself out, her eyes fixed on the letter in her hands. When she heard the front door close, she carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. To the woman who loves Robert after me. My name is Michelle Johnson. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've married the most wonderful man I've ever known. I hope he makes you as happy as he made me. I'm writing this because there are things you should know about Robert that he might not tell you himself. He carries guilt too easily and blames himself for things beyond his control. First, he will try to be perfect for you. He'll work too hard, stay up too late, push himself beyond reasonable limits to give you everything he thinks you want. Please remind him that what you want most is him, healthy, present, and at peace. Second, he doesn't know how to ask for help. The strongest person in any crisis, the one everyone leans on, that's our Robert. But even the strongest trees bend in the wind sometimes. When he gets quiet and distant, that's when he needs you most, though he'll never admit it. Third, and most importantly, he may not tell you about our daughter right away. Zara is his heart walking around outside his body. His fear of anyone hurting her or rejecting her runs bone deep. If he's kept her from you, it's not because he doesn't trust you or love you. It's because loving a child the way he loves Zara makes you vulnerable in ways that terrify even the bravest men. I don't know who you are as I write this. I don't know your background, your dreams, what makes you laugh or cry. But I know you must be remarkable for Robert to have chosen you. And I'm asking you, one woman to another, to be patient with him. To understand that his capacity for love is enormous, but his fear of loss is just as vast. Zara is the best of both of us. She has Robert's determination, his analytical mind, and my passion for music. She sees the world differently than most people, not just because of her blindness, but because she listens more deeply, feels more intensely. If you open your heart to her, I promise she will enrich your life in ways you can't imagine. I'm entrusting the two people I love most in the world to your care. Please be gentle with their hearts. With gratitude and hope, Michelle. Emily let the letter fall to her lap, tears streaming down her face. All these years, she'd imagined Michelle as a vague shadow from Robert's past. Now she felt the weight of the woman's final wish, a wish she had failed spectacularly to fulfill. L. She pulled out her phone and for the first time in a week made a call instead of ignoring one. When the voice on the other end answered, she took a deep breath. Catherine, it's Emily. I was wondering, could I speak with Zara before tomorrow's meeting? There's something I need to say to her. There was a long pause before Catherine responded. I'll ask her. But Emily, she's been through enough. If she doesn't want to see you, you need to respect that. I understand, Emily said quietly. Please tell her. Tell her I found a letter. From her mother. And I think she should read it too. After hanging up, Emily went to Robert's study and began sorting through the photos she'd found. Arranging them chronologically. Robert and Michelle young and in love. Zara as a newborn. As a toddler learning to navigate the world without sight. As a young girl at a piano. As a teenager receiving academic awards. As a young woman in her college dorm. The life Robert had lived in parallel to their marriage. The life that had mattered more to him than the one he shared with Emily. She picked up a photo of Zara at what appeared to be her high school graduation. She had Michelle's smile, Robert's strong chin. Looking at her face, really looking at it for the first time, Emily could see both her parents there, the physical legacy of a love that had endured beyond death. Emily thought about her own legacy, the mark she would leave on the world. A perfectly decorated home, a flawless social image, a marriage built on half-truths and careful omissions. Was it too late to build something more meaningful? To honor Michelle's final wish by truly seeing Zara for who she was? Not as a threat to Emily's security or position, but as Robert's beloved child. She placed the photo carefully in a leather album she'd found in Robert's closet, alongside the others she'd collected. Tomorrow, after the will reading, she would give it to Zara, whether the young woman wanted to speak with her or not. It wasn't forgiveness. Emily wasn't sure that was possible yet. But it was a start. A small step toward understanding the man she'd been married to for 15 years, and the daughter he had loved enough to build a separate life to protect. As she closed the album, Emily felt something shift within her. Not healing exactly, not yet, but perhaps the first acknowledgement that healing might someday be possible. 3 weeks after the will reading, Emily sat at a corner table in Riverside Cafe, nervously checking her watch for the third time in 10 minutes. The coffee in front of her had gone cold, untouched since the waitress had set it down 20 minutes ago. The will reading had been as difficult as George had predicted. Emily had maintained her composure throughout, signing the necessary documents without protest, even as Thompson outlined the specifics of what would go to Zara. The personal items, the Vermont house, the trust fund, the percentage of Robert's estate. She'd nodded through it all, aware of the surprised glances from Catherine and George. Zara had been there too, sitting quietly beside Catherine, her expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses, her guide dog resting calmly at her feet. Emily had approached her afterward, offering the photo album she'd compiled along with Michelle's letter. I thought you might want these, she'd said awkwardly. They're photos of you and your parents, and there's a letter from your mother. To me, but I think she would have wanted you to have it. Zara had accepted the album, her fingers tracing the leather cover. Thank you, she'd said, her voice carefully neutral. Nothing more. Emily hadn't expected immediate forgiveness. She knew her behavior at the funeral had been unforgivable, her words cruel, but she'd hoped for something, some acknowledgement of her effort to make amends. Catherine had been the one to suggest this meeting, calling Emily a week after the will reading. Zara's going back to school next Monday, she'd said. She'd like to meet with you before she leaves. Just the two of you. Now, waiting in the cafe, Emily wondered what Zara wanted to say to her. More importantly, she wondered what she could possibly say to Zara that would matter. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and Emily looked up to see Zara entering, her white cane sweeping gently in front of her. No guide dog today. She was dressed simply in jeans and a blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. Several patrons glanced up at her entrance, their eyes following her progress through the tables. Zara, Emily called softly, standing up. I'm over here at the corner table. Zara turned toward her voice, navigating confidently between tables until she reached Emily. "Is there a chair directly in front of me?" she asked. "Yes, about 2 feet ahead. The table is round," Emily added, then immediately wondered if that was helpful information or patronizing. She had no idea how to interact with someone who was blind. Another failing in a growing list. Zara found the chair and sat down gracefully. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, setting her cane against the table edge. "Of course," Emily replied, resuming her seat. "Would you like some coffee? Or tea? Tea would be nice. Earl Grey if they have it." Emily signaled the waitress and placed the order, then turned back to Zara, taking in the young woman's features more carefully than she had before. The resemblance to Robert was stronger than she'd initially realized. The shape of her mouth when she spoke. The way she held her head slightly tilted when listening. "I read my mother's letter," Zara said after the waitress had brought her tea. "Several times, actually. I never knew she'd written to you." Emily folded her hands in her lap. "I didn't either until George brought it to me. Your mother sounds like she was an extraordinary woman." She was. At least that's what everyone tells me. My memories of her are fragments, the smell of her perfume, the sound of her laugh, the way she'd sing me to sleep. Zara's fingers traced the rim of her teacup. Dad kept her alive for me through his stories. Emily felt a pang at the casual way Zara said Dad. Such a simple word. Laden with love and familiarity. A relationship Emily had never known existed until it was too late. "The photos you collected," Zara continued. "Catherine described them to me. There were some even I didn't know existed. Dad was always taking pictures, but he rarely shared them with me. He said photography was his way of seeing for both of us. He was very talented," Emily said. "I never knew that about him. He never took photos when we were together." A sad smile touched Zara's lips. There were a lot of things he kept separate. They fell into silence. The ambient noise of the cafe, clinking cups, quiet conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, filling the space between them. "I didn't ask you here to make you uncomfortable," Zara finally said. "I just needed to meet you properly, to understand the woman my father married." Emily swallowed hard. "I'm not sure I'm worth understanding given how I behaved at the funeral." Zara took a sip of her tea before responding. "People rarely show their best selves in moments of shock and grief. I try not to judge anyone based on their worst day." The generosity of this statement left Emily momentarily speechless. "That's very kind of you. Not kind. Just fair." Zara set down her cup. "My father loved you, Emily. He wouldn't have stayed with you for 15 years if he didn't, but he was wrong to lie to you. Wrong to keep me a secret. He thought he was protecting you," Emily said softly. "Yes. And in doing so, he underestimated B. Toth of us." Zara leaned forward slightly. "He never gave you the chance to rise above the prejudices he feared you had, and he never gave me the chance to understand an important part of his life." Emily considered this. "Do you think, if he had told me from the beginning, things could have been different? I don't know, maybe. But that's not what happened, and we can't change the past." Zara's fingers found the teacup again, circling its rim thoughtfully. "All we can do is decide what happens next." "What do you want to happen next, Zara?" Emily asked. "I want to know if the woman who shares my last name, the woman my father chose to spend his life with, might someday be part of my life too. Not as a replacement for my mother, or even as a stepmother in any traditional sense, but as someone connected to me through my father." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. "I don't deserve that chance." "It's not about deserving," Zara said simply. "It's about choosing. About deciding what kind of people we want to be going forward." A memory surfaced in Emily's mind. Robert on their wedding day, leaning close to whisper in her ear. "Life is all about choices. Today I'm making the best one of my life." Had he believed that then? Had there been a moment when he'd truly chosen her, before the weight of his secrets had come between them? "I found something else in Robert's study," Emily said, reaching into her purse. "I wanted to give it to you today." She pulled out a small velvet box and placed it on the table. "It's his watch, the one that belonged to his father, and his grandfather before that. The will specified it should go to you, but it wasn't with his other personal items. I found it in a drawer with this note." She handed Zara a small card. "Would you like me to read it to you?" Zara nodded, her fingers resting lightly on the velvet box. Emily unfolded the card. For Zara, time is the most precious thing we can give to those we love. I've tried to give you as much of mine as I could. I hope when you hold this, you'll remember the hours we spent together were the best of my life. All my love, Dad. Tears slipped from beneath Zara's sunglasses, tracking silently down her cheeks. He wore this watch every day, she said quietly. I remember the sound it made when he wound it each morning. Emily opened the box and gently took Zara's hand, placing the watch in her palm. It's still working. I wound it this morning. Zara's fingers explored the watch, the smooth glass face, the worn leather band, the intricate ridges of the winding mechanism. Thank you for bringing this to me. It belongs with you, Emily said simply. They sat in silence for a moment, the watch resting in Zara's palm like a bridge between past and present, between what was lost and what might still be found. I'm going back to Berkeley on Monday, Zara said, carefully placing the watch back in its box. My senior recital is in December. I'd like it if you would come. The invitation hung in the air between them, unexpected and precious. Emily thought about refusing, about saying Zara was being too generous, too forgiving. But perhaps that would be another form of selfishness, rejecting a gift because she felt unworthy of it, rather than accepting it with gratitude and the promise to do better. I'd be honored, she said finally. Thank you, Zara nodded, a small smile touching her lips.
Catherine has my contact information.
She can send you the details. As they finished their drinks and prepared to leave, Emily found herself wondering what Robert would think of this moment. His widow and his daughter, sitting together in a quiet cafe, finding their way toward something neither of them could yet name. Outside, the autumn sun broke through the clouds, warming their faces as they stood on the sidewalk. My ride should be here soon, Zara said, her cane unfolded and ready. George is picking me up. I could wait with you, Emily offered. I'd like that, Zara replied. They stood side by side in the sunlight, not touching, not speaking, but sharing the same space. Two women connected by a man who had loved them both in his imperfect way. Zara, Emily said suddenly, your mother's letter. She asked me to be gentle with your heart. I failed at that, spectacularly. But I want you to know I'm going to try to do better. Zara turned toward Emily's voice, her expression thoughtful behind her dark glasses. My father used to tell me that we don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love. We just have to be willing to grow. A car pulled up to the curb and George waved from the driver's seat. Zara seemed to sense his arrival. That's my ride, she said. Thank you for meeting me today, Emily. Thank you for giving me the chance, Emily replied. As she watched George help Zara into the car, Emily thought about choices. Robert's choices that had brought them to this point, and the choices that lay ahead for her and Zara. She thought about the watch, keeping time for generations, passing from father to daughter as a symbol of love that transcended distance and deception. The car pulled away from the curb, and Emily remained on the sidewalk, her face turned up to the sun. For the first time since Robert's death, since the revelation that had shattered her understanding of her marriage, she felt something like peace. Not because anything had been resolved or forgotten, but because something new had begun, tentative and fragile but real. A connection built not on obligation or guilt, but on the simple recognition of their shared humanity, their shared loss and perhaps someday, their shared future. As Emily finally turned to walk home, she found herself wondering what music Zara would play at her senior recital. She made a mental note to learn more about classical piano, to understand at least a small part of Zara's world before December. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't family, not in any traditional sense, but it was a beginning, a choice to move forward rather than remain trapped in the past, and for today that was enough.